We are recording. Hello, world. Welcome back.
Hi.
I've got the lovely Meg Kettell with us today, and I'm super excited to chat with her and share her with the world.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I feel like, I guess I should have asked this before we recorded, but I think maybe the first time we met was through one of the union, women's meetings. Maybe. Yeah?
Definitely, yeah.
But I don't know too much about your background, like how you got into film, how you got with cameras, if you wanted to share.
Yeah, I guess it's I think I had maybe a little bit of a traditional path. I didn't have any family or friends or anyone in filmmaking, so I think it's a bit unusual in that respect. I don't have the legacy that most of the people that I've met since or have. But I was just like a very visual kid. I loved the movies. I'd go every Friday to the movies after school. I got into still photography in the 8th grade and taking 35 millimeter classes and developing printing and shooting, developing my own negatives and really into photo classes and eventually, I don't know, I just was watching the credits of some epic period piece one day and realized people get paid money to work on movies? That's amazing. And I think I was just realizing that could be a career was of something that seemed so cool and so unfamiliar and kind of exotic. And so I ended up doing, still photography still photography classes for many years and all through high school. And then I ended up just sort of applying to film school, sort of hoping that was going to be what I actually wanted to do, not having been on any sets, but just seeing that that there were many jobs. Obviously, looking at the credits, you can tell there's many, many jobs and many types of films. And so I applied to film school, and I knew that I was never really interested in directing. I always was really just into the visuals and how the visuals can tell the story. And, I wasn't really into working with the actors or raising the money or doing the sound. So I got into NYU. And I went to film school at NYU and then I just sort of followed this camera path, once I got out.
That's awesome. Are you still in touch with anyone that you graduated with?
I am, yeah. I mean, it was all sort of pre-Facebook, so I'm not as in touch with as many people as I think I should be these days. But yeah, definitely having worked on, it's very film production heavy, not much in the way of theory. It's very you try all the courses, you're working on other people's student films, and you're working in as an AC and a grip and a gaffer for years, for free. But you really do sort of get a skills, you have a skill set, sort of a marketable skill set once you graduate. If you want to, if you put in the work, you can definitely, be paid as an AC on other student films or low budget indies and stuff like that. And that's sort of how I just started.
That's awesome. Can you tell me a little bit more about your experience as a camera assistant and then to operating?
Yeah, I was lucky in that I sort of joined the union a year after graduating NYU. I was working full-time, when I got out, I was able to work full-time as a camera assistant, a focus puller on student films and Columbia films and just shitty little things, Sorry. Very low budget, but working, and just in camera. And so I had met a couple of union people when I had an internship at Panavision, and I met a bunch of ACs, and they had encouraged me. They saw that I knew already the camera gear and was very familiar with the whole process. And so they had encouraged me to sort of take the union test, which I did. I think I took the test the year that I graduated NYU. And then I just didn't know, and I didn't know enough union people that would hire me. So I waited a year trying to put out some feelers and meet more people. And I waited a year until I had a job offer. And then that's when I wrote the money down. I was like, okay,
Nice.
Yeah, so I joined like the following year. And then I worked, as a second AC for like a decade, like on big movies in New York, sort of at the tail end, which is now the tail end of the film days and of big movies in New York, before the TV came in and before the digital came in. And so I feel really lucky to have kind of come up with all of the really amazing old school guys, I feel like I was trained well and, got yelled at and trained well by all so many great DPs and ACs in New York.
Were there certain projects or DPs or ACs in that time that you remember that just so shaped that experience for you? Like that first day, like 10 years of it?
It's like, I feel really lucky because I got to just work with, but just by accident, just the timing of when I graduated, really, I just got to work with like the best crews in New York, like the best gappers and grips and first ACs. And like, I just think it was such a great time of those old school film days. I worked with Stephen Goldblatt and Dante Spinote. And like, I just sort of caught the tail end of those like just brilliant, like masterful cinematographers. And some of them would let me, sit in on their coloring sessions or go see the dailies or,
That's awesome.
It was very like, people were very, into, sharing their craft. And I think that I was very lucky in that way.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a huge part of this, right? Like the collaborations and the network that you make. Like if I could possibly be back in like my 16-year-old self or like anyone's 16-year-old self, I feel like that's like this huge jump. Like you see movies and you're like, how do I get to those? And then once you're in it, it's amazing these people you meet. And then if you're lucky, you can build those connections and they last a lifetime. But I was wondering actually if you could speak a bit about maybe some of the longest collaborations you've had, either the longest ones as with other ACs or with certain DPs.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when you're in it, you are always like, you think like these are your people forever,
Yeah.
And then there's like, it becomes that there's like cycles, I think they're like 1 to 3 year cycles of people that are like, you get in with this person and you do a couple of jobs back to back with that person. And then that person left town and now you don't have that, and you just kind of like, you're always kind of like expanding the network and always like, there's always something different or new or somebody that can't do a job or something that eventually sort of keeps you. But it's kind of great because it's never the same ever. It's like always, you're continually evolving and meeting new people. So it's never boring, which is like maybe my favorite thing about film in general.
Oh, totally. I feel the same way. I mean, I didn't want a desk job and, I don't, so. But maybe
like never office job now.
Yeah. For people that don't know, I was wondering if you could maybe explain a bit more about that process in the sense of, when you are a second camera assistant and you have like a first camera assistant that hires you and it's kind of like, okay, we're this duo. And some people have the fortune of like, say working on like Law and Order and then working in that pairing for years. And then some people, then you get like boxed in because then you're always that person's second. Like, can you explain that more to people?
Well, it's really intricate because, people always have their jobs and then there's always people want to move up, right? So there's a hierarchy, right, of the DP, the camera operator, the first AC, second AC, and loader or two, or maybe digital, whatever, utility. And so like people, you kind of go with the people, but the people who hired you are, and hopefully, going to eventually move up. And sometimes you get to go with that person and sometimes you don't. And sometimes that person moves to LA or whatever it is. And so you kind of, there's no like predicting it. You just kind of, what I just loved was like when I got to the place where I could say no to the jobs that I didn't want or the people I didn't want to spend 14, 15 hours a day with, and like really got to hang out with the people that I loved spending 15 hours a day with. That was when I loved being a camera assistant. And you just sort of, and then you kind of, everybody's kind of trying in theory to move up. So every couple of years there's somebody makes it or somebody doesn't or somebody quits the business or whatever, and like it might bring you with them or they might not, or so it's kind of, you're constantly kind of always needing to have a network.
Would you say in your career that you've had certain advocates or just like biggest support systems that really like vouch for you and you're like, you know what, this is your chance to first on this or operate on this or shoot this?
I had some amazing, such great first ACs that I worked for years. Chris Solano, and I worked with Andrew Priestley and Lance Mayer when he was pulling focus, and Ed Nesson, and like, all the best. So, and they were always very supportive of me, and shared work, and also like recommendations, which is huge. And yeah, I think big advocates, which is sort of, it's kind of invaluable because you need kind of that word of mouth and those jobs to sort of keep getting you the work. When you're full-time freelance, it's like, you need everything working on your behalf.
Oh, I totally know what you mean. I swear when I first joined the union, I thought it was so funny that I would meet like these different pockets of crews in the city, and they would all talk to each other through me. Like I'd be the state player and they're like, tell this guy this thing about the Steelers, or tell this guy this thing about the Jets. And it would be like these like inside jokes, but they would love it. And it's like, but you know my guy. And so if my guy vouched for you, we love you. And I'm like,
yeah, correct.
It was really sweet, but it's just so funny how all that connects.
Yeah, and it still does. Then when I stopped ACing and I re-rated to operator several years ago, you kind of need those connects to kind of get you, like when you start off, obviously you're usually like day playing because you're just trying to build up your credits and your resume and stuff. So a lot of people start by sort of day playing in that space, and you really just need like all of those ACs and people that you've known for like the last, I've been in the union 16 years now. Like, you need all those people to sort of keep it going, which is great.
That's awesome. I mean, that's hopefully what I'm working on to do the same, but that's what's, I don't know, I guess it's also very curious about the container where we're in this present day of how we are staying connected while we're not on sets or not going to Panavision or area events or something, So.
I know, but these new, like all these cinematography Zooms have been so inspiring, because everybody's at home. And even though we're not together, just the fact that like Bradford Young and Reed Morano are available on a Friday and they can just shoot the shit for 2 hours. It's like, we would never have that without COVID. Everybody would be on different jobs on different parts of the planet. And so it's been very inspiring to see that like we're all in the same situation, but like just to kind of reconnect with work people has been, and just see work people on the video has been like, oh yay, some sort of sense of normalcy.
Yeah, it is. It's been really empowering and exciting seeing people share their stories and really be self-reflective. That's the thing about the panels, or, I watched an SOC one with Larry McConkey and Janice Min. And it was just like so lovely because there's all the sirens in my neighborhood. Like hearing people really reflect upon their careers versus like just on set, Ooh, it's probably really loud. Sorry, folks at home. Just
New York City, and it's fine.
New York City. Yeah, but I mean that's the fun that I've always tried to bring to set, is that sense of like where you got to where you are, and all these stories, like, when you're on set with someone for 15 hours, you're not just doing work. You're like, you know what? The last time I was on set for 15 hours, I was actually in the desert shooting Jarhead. You're like, oh, okay. Or like, oh, the last time I did a steady oneer was, back with Scorsese. And you're like, oh, okay. Like those are awesome moments that you get to share. And then it's like those histories that are part of your histories and are part of the next people's histories,
Yes. Chris Solano used to say, when I did my last assisting jobs before I re-rated, and Solano would say that you're only as good as your best set stories. Like people want to hire you because they heard you worked on that crazy movie and want to hear all the stories. Like, he's like, that's marketable. You need to
Ooh, that's a good point.
Make sure your stories keep up your stories. Cause that's like, you know, what are you going to do 14 hours a day? Like, got a lot of time for stories.
Yeah, I always find it awkward when someone doesn't have stories. Like, you're like, we've been here for 15 hours. You don't have a story? Like,
yeah, that's always a red flag.
Yeah. Well, speaking of storytelling, I'll try to segue on here. Can you speak to your experience as a camera operator working with a DP and a director and really being the one kind of and the first in the line to help tell their story, and like how you have felt or how it feels when I don't know, I'm just really excited about that. And you know, like I always am like very observant of those moments and how much like,
sorry, you broke up for like a couple like little words. Can you say again? Just do your sentence one more time.
Sure. Can you speak to your experience as a camera operator working with cinematographers and directors and how much you are negotiating that experience storytelling, like through your body in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing about camera operating that you don't realize when you are a camera assistant is like the camera operator is actually like the best job on set. It is, you have a front row movie experience. Like you're looking through the eyepiece every day at like world-class actors, like doing these amazing stories. Like it's literally the best job on set. The DP is super political. You have to do a lot of dinners and schmoozing to get that job and keep that job, right? You need big friends in high places. The ACs, you know, you're just humping gear all day.
Yeah.
That gets old. As you get old, that gets old. The camera operator is like you said, like actually part of the storytelling. Like sometimes you're handheld and it's like your movements are telling the story. Sometimes it's a crane shot or a dolly, you're on the wheels, you're, you know, it's always interesting and you're always the front row, like the front row seat. And now that there's, it used to be like, you know, now that the DPs are at the DIT station, you know, they used to be like out metering and like being the DPs were way out in front, you know. But now sort of the operators are sort of the face of the camera department. The first ACs are like in a different room, pulling focus off a monitor. And the DP is in the DIT tent. So you're kind of like to the director, to the actors, to the script supervisor, to hair, makeup, wardrobe, you're kind of like the point person because you're just like looking through the eyepiece. And I think like the thing about being an operator is like kind of a job that I think everybody wants. And like, I would say that like 80%, the hardest part about being a camera operator is getting the job because it's a job that everybody wants, right? So I'd say it's like 80% about getting the job and 20% about, you know, once you've done it for 15 years, it's like, it's very second nature. It's really like, it's the best seat in the house. And so it's a very coveted job to have and everybody wants it. That's probably the hardest part, I would say.
Was there a certain point where you kind of knew that that's where you wanted to go or make your, like, because I know some people get to points in their career where like, I want to be here or I'm constantly going here, you know?
You know, I have this sort of like hodgepodge. I'm not sure that it's like normal for like most union people because, you know, I went to film school for cinematography and I've been DPing projects for the last 20 years. So I've always just wanted to be a DP, and then these are all just sort of steps I'm taking along the way, you know, and I want to learn from the best people and do it the right way. And, you know, I want to be good at all the jobs and understand like, what does the second AC do? What does the first AC do? What do they need from a DP or camera operator? So it's always been part of the path because you know, half of my work is non-union DP, and it always has been. And I've always, even when I was a second AC, I only worked with first ACs that would let me take a day or two off to shoot a short film over the weekend, or let me replace myself to shoot a music video, or I only like worked with people that were super into it and thought that was cool, and like, yeah, sure, replace yourself with someone good, we don't care, you know. So I was like, I've been DPing for the last like 20 years. So it's like, this is like a great step in, you know, in the process. I love the union DP work is great just because the level of production and the budgets are amazing and the stories are amazing. And it's just like, you're always working with top-notch everybody, like the budgets, the actors. So that's just great because it's like the top of filmmaking, you know? But then you're shooting a low-budget indie film for very little money, you know, in September, you know, and it's kind of like, I'm always doing a combination of both those things. And I think a lot of union camera assistants maybe don't do that. So I have, I think, maybe a little bit of an unusual path in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how other people perceive it because I'm kind of also in it too. But it is always, I find, really interesting and exciting to know that people have different paths in it. You know, like you meet different people on set who kind of like find their niche in it, like maybe went to film school and are like, well, but I could do this solid just as an assistant, or I could do this, you know? So I'm just curious, like with your experience, do you feel like you'll get to a point where you will then be listed in the union as a cinematographer and then you're like, I don't have to do all this other stuff? Or is it something about your experience and all these other maybe like inspirations along the way that kind of keep you inspired maybe?
I mean, I think the goal is always to just sort of be doing the top of whatever you're doing, you know? So I obviously, like, I've been waiting years for my first union DP job. I mean, I've had some second units and, you know, stunt units and splinter units and visual effects unit stuff on some TV shows, but I've been like, you know, it's a process. It's a huge, usually many decade process. You know, when I first got in, it was like those guys were loaders for 10 years, first ACs for 10 years, operators for 10 years. And then when they were like 65, they got to DP, you know, it was like a process. So I feel like lucky that coming up in that age, but being a younger person, I feel like I'm still, even though I wish I was further, I think I'm still ahead of, you know, I feel like it's with all the TV and the Netflix and the streaming, it's like really opened up the amount of work and the amount of projects and the experience that you can get in a short amount of time it's totally changed.
Oh, totally. Well, I feel like with the politics of the world at large right now, it's hard not to talk about it, but I'm just curious if you can maybe share a bit more about your experience as a woman in all of this. I feel like sometimes I can only speak for myself, but I feel like sometimes there's conversations where it's like, let's not talk about race. Let's not talk about gender. It doesn't exist. Yeah. And I think if anything, you know, in my own self-reflection, I've realized that it's a privilege to say it's not even there. But I find it really compelling to hear other people's story as well. So I was wondering if you could share yours.
You know, it's so tiered because it was very common when I was an early second AC. It would be very common that I would be the only woman on set, or definitely the only woman in the camera department, probably the only woman like below the line, and people would comment on it all the time. You know, all different people of all different categories would come up and be like, I love seeing a woman AC, and they were like, and I was like, oh, that's like, I didn't come from a film family, so I didn't know how weird it was. You know, I was just like doing my thing. I wasn't aware of like breaking any boundaries. I was just like, what? Like, I love this thing. Like, I'm doing this thing. Like, it wasn't groundbreaking to me. But seeing now, so many years later, so many more women, and not as many, but more people of color, but not as many as needed. But there's also like so much more progress that we haven't made, and it's hard to like from when I started, I've seen tremendous progress. But it's not nearly enough, right? The problem that I've seen is that now there's a ton of second ACs. Well, now there's first ACs and second ACs and loaders that are women. And that's not uncommon. And you have maybe multiple women in the camera department. That would have been unheard of in my day. But in the film days, there were no women for focus pullers at all. There was only Heather Norton, and that was it in New York. Like literally the only one. And the digital revolution of going everything to Alexa really, and focus monitors really opened that up. And now you see women focus pullers, but I still, I'm day playing all the time on TV shows in New York, and there's just like no women operators or DPs. Like they just don't exist. And the same is true for people of color. Like you can see people in the union, but at the lower levels. And I think it's very hard to move up.
Yeah. And that's the story. I mean, it's so interesting to hear, because I'm less than 5 years in this. So I'm, hearing your story, hearing Deb's story, hearing so many other women's story that, got into this before the Me Too movement. That's a whole other story, like after it, but it doesn't mean we still have so much more to go. It's just, I think that's something that I guess it's just hard for people to, without knowing more of the mechanism or the machine behind it all, it's hard to see that because we're not the cast. We're not Netflix, but we're all the people that support Netflix. So, that's not usually their PR move to show the crew. Like no one really wants to see like what all the grips or electrics look like, like sometimes they don't really want to show you what we look like after 16 hours of working, but it's like hard to get that other bit there. But actually speaking of, I know that maybe I'm speaking out of, but aren't you good friends with Ellen Kuras?
Yes. Yeah. Ellen is amazing. Yeah. Ellen has been so nice. I think it was 2015. I started in the local 600. I started a women's committee in the Eastern region in New York. And Ellen was super into just the idea of it. And she had, in the early days when I was running it, the first like 3 years, I think, she would offer her house for us to have our meetings often. And like, it was incredible that we would go to her little house in Nyack and just like have these incredible conversations. And I mean, Ellen is such a like champion, like she puts her money where, she really is invested in trying to help bring up women, it's pretty cool.
Well, for anyone that's listening to this, if you don't know who Ellen Kuras is, she's like a trailblazing cinematographer and director. And I think it's important to know, even someone like Catherine Bigelow, Ava DuVernay, like 1,000 people, but they're out there. Just sometimes we don't see them. And it's really awesome to know how much they've really invested in people below them too. And, bringing them onto things or supporting your, like the start of the women's committee, which I know was beneficial to me when I first started. I had nowhere to start. So knowing that was awesome. I don't know what I would have done,
Yeah. Yeah.
But are there other female DPs that you found a lot of, I don't know, I feel maybe almost redundant to say solidarity, like obviously, but are there other ones that you specifically are really
there's so many great ones. The biggest problem that I see is like, so many of the women are just non-union because the union is very cost prohibitive, and you need to get it costs a lot of money to get in, it costs a lot of money to stay in, and you have to get all of your own work. And so it's like kind of doesn't really work for like a lot of people in the low budget space. And so there's like so many amazing women who've been sort of just like busting their ass for years, decades. And there are women in the union, but there's also a lot more that are sort of non-union and very, very stuck in this kind of low budget world. I early on at NYU, I had two great teachers that were mentors, and one was Mike Carmine, who was the undergrad, but then I met Sandy Sissel, who was teaching at NYU grad school at the time that I went there, and she was like a total like mentor. Like she was the first woman that I saw, because I was so naive. Like I just didn't, film school is kind of like 50-50 men, women. And then I would just be like the only woman in all my cinematography classes.
Hmm.
But I didn't really like process it. I was just like, yeah, like Mike Carmine and people were like encouraging me. And then I met Sandy, and she kind of looks like me. And she shot Salam Bombay with Mira Nair. And she's just like the most amazing one of very early ASC members. And she's such an incredible, when I saw her and I was like, oh, like women can do this. Like that was like literally, I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I would say Sandy Sissel was one of my earliest inspirations of just like seeing women like out there doing it. She was at NYU. She was shooting like the second unit of Master and Commander, and just like totally kicking ass in the old school film days.
That's awesome.
When it was not easy for women. So she was like a total mentor for me in my early days, which was great.
Well, that's actually another segue I'd like to put in there is, are there certain cinematographers that either you've worked with or you admire watching as a cinematographer yourself, where you can be like, oh, I could always watch Ellen stuff, or I could always watch Deacon stuff,
So many. Like that's the kind of cool thing about, I think this is going to make me sound like maybe a dinosaur, but like that's the really cool thing about Instagram is like, we did not have that resource. There was no access to any of these DPs. Like when we were coming up in the film days, like if you got like an ASC article, you would be happy. And like, maybe that would be like a half true article because they didn't want to give away all the secrets. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was actually like a very like secret sauce, And so now with everybody being on Instagram, it's so inspiring to me because you can see all these people that come up in this digital age and they're not hindered by any of these like old processes that some of us, are like, oh, don't we have to do this? Don't we have to do that? No, they're just going to go out and make it. You know what I mean? With their friends. Like, that's so awesome, But I'm so inspired by Bradford Young. Obviously, Reed Morano is like a personal hero because she's just insanely talented, and now directing because she's just conquered DPing.
Have you worked with Reed too?
I haven't. No, we're in some of the same women cinematographers groups, like Cinematographers XX is a website where we're all on, and there's a lot of us are connected in a like email and on Instagram and stuff like that. I haven't worked for Reed, but Rena Yang is another incredible woman out of London that's just like on fire and so young and just doing such cool things. Caitlin Arizmendi, like there's just every day there's more and more inspiring people, and there's now this new access through Instagram and social media that was never there, and it's just, I think it's such a invaluable way to sort of learn from your peers.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's very inspiring to me, just the start of it, but it's almost like I can't imagine not having it. Like I kind of grew up with all the access. So it's like, I don't even know what it's like not to have all that, but I'm really into it. Like, I think it's amazing to see firsthand or to be able to reach out to people like you, or even, other people in our industry on Instagram. Like it's nuts. Like I remember even earlier this year thinking that 3 years ago, say I'd work with a kind of old school DP and maybe he'd give you his like email. You'd be like, email me, kid. And you're like, huh. Like, what do you say in an email? But now like some of these people, it's kind of like, whether or not you do have an email correspondence, you could also just like DM them. And and then with COVID, we could like talk on the Zoom. It's great.
Yeah.
I love it.
I mean, it's totally changed, I think, people's like how they learn and what they're learning. And like, I think there's also this new way, like these new young DPs are so willing to share. They're not trying to hold their secrets. They're really trying to like have honest conversations and like tell about their process and like inspire. I think they're inspiring, I'm sure, like current film students. I mean, I'm being inspired, and you know, like I'm sure what that would do if I were in film school now would be incredible to have, and like art, like be able to watch a Zoom of your hero talking about their lighting setups. Like that's incredible. You know, it's very, I think it's a very cool, lucky generation for people that are coming up right now.
Do you feel that, it's like, speaking of lucky, do you feel that in this time of self-reflection, being in quarantine, have you kind of looked back at your work and looked at your maybe aesthetic over time and been like, wow, I look at kind of how cool it was that I did that 20 years ago, or look at that last project I did and like, I can really stand behind that. Have you done that at all? Or I don't know.
I haven't even, you know, I probably should have be like recutting my stuff. I haven't even really reflected on the work. I've been sort of reflecting on like the process and like that we're all like, because you just go from like job to job to job for like decades. You know, like that's been really reflective for me of like really like this mandatory pause is just like, it's like, oh, why? Like, I mean, I know why we're all working so hard, and I know that it's so easy to sort of just go from job to job because like we're freelance, right? You take the money when it's there. Like that's just the rule, right?
Yeah.
But just, I think being able to reevaluate, like always getting on a plane, always flying somewhere, going here for a job, a lot of all the travel, of the missing, you know, family stuff, and just like working like so many hours so crazy feels insane right now in this COVID moment, which, you know, I'm so curious. Like I was saying, it's kind of like a little snapshot, like a little time capsule, like what's going to be, you know, what when we look back on this in a year, are we going to laugh at like all these COVID conversations, or is this going to be like our new normal? I have no idea.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
for
actually,
me, like the amount of work and like the nonstop work has been that's what I've been reflecting on the most.
well, that's something actually I've been asking most people in my series so far, is kind of how they managed or balanced out their sanity when they work all the time versus managing your sanity now that we're not working all the time. So I was wondering if you've reflected on that, like what were things that maybe you did that kept you kind of balanced all the time versus now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you know, when you're just going, you're just in survival mode. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you're just like trying to give 100% as much as you can. And sometimes you can't, like you're not, but because you're maybe a little pulled in too many directions, or you're prepping a job while you're doing this job, and you know, and sometimes maybe you're not giving the best of you. And I think that we see that now, but you're always just trying to do like give every job 100%. And sometimes like your sleep or your, you know, your life or whatever is suffers for that, you know. I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's been the hardest thing is because I think we're all so used to hustling and working so hard. I think to really have to sit down and think about who you are without the work is really mind-blowing for at least me. Because you identify that work as a part of who you are, and that work ethic, and the always being on set is feels like a huge part of my personality. And to really just sort of like sit now with myself and be like, who are you without work, is I've never done that, and it's really eye-opening for me.
Oh, I'm right there with you. I mean, I've thought about this a lot, whether it was even before I was in the film industry and now specifically, because both my parents, I grew up with them being very like can-do, hustly. You work because that's what you do, you know?
Yep.
And again, that's been really a sort of like new mission of mine to kind of see how we're all handling it, because when I started all this, it did feel very much like survival. And I was like, okay, I'm going to survive in there too. And now we're like, oh. I think that's a good sound effect. But I know we could talk all day, Meg, but before we maybe wrap it up, I was wondering if we could, or you could tell us a little bit more about what you think the world could be like. So say in this magical world, I know it's Thursday in July in Brooklyn, but what you think if possibly we went back in September, what that would look or feel like.
I think it's going to be really hard at first. Like our industry, when I explain it to people that aren't in film, I'm like, well, we just sort of like get a bunch of people together in a small room and touch the same dirty gear all the time. So it's not really like COVID friendly. So I think it's going to be really expensive. And I think that the TV shows and the big movies that have the money are just gonna like, it's gonna be slower, and it's gonna be to be more intentional and well thought out and not less last minute, which I think could be good for all of us in all the departments. You know, a little more planning, a little more decisive decision making. Like I think that that's gonna actually could be amazing. But I think it's going to like be, you know, I think until there's some sort of cure or vaccine, I think it's going to be, you know, a slower process, less immediate. And I think we just have to really have patience with it. And, you know, I don't care wearing a mask. If it gets me back to work, I will wear all the masks. I will wear 10 masks. You know what I mean? Like, whatever it takes to get back to work is what we just need to be doing. And I hope that maybe we are all able to reflect on the amount of hours that we work per day. And for me, like, I think like the weekend turnarounds of working Saturdays, I would love to see that like gone, you know? I know it's like controversial, like French hours seems to be the only solution, and that's kind of controversial in our union world because you know, there's like loopholes and it's problematic. But I think if we can do good French hours, you know, like that don't like hurt the crews but just sort of contain the days to like 10-hour days, I think it would actually be pretty game changing for everybody in production. And maybe that would be something that everyone decides like, yeah, this is worth doing, or at least just like containing like the amount of hours that we shoot per day, which I think is probably really bad for all of us.
Oh, totally. I feel like if there's any bit out of the situation where our industry somehow becomes more humane, that's like such a win, right? Like we've all lost, like the world has lost right now. I think that's, not to be a Debbie Downer, but I feel like that's something it's hard not to acknowledge how many
all losers.
We're all losing right now. Like if you don't know someone who's died, like the person next in your life does. But hopefully the positive of all that loss is that maybe we gain more quality of life. Maybe. We'll see.
I think that would be huge, you know? Yeah. I think that would be actually
like, can you imagine like how many times on set you have those like set stories where you're like, oh my God, I had this 20-hour day. It was crazy. And it was like, oh my God, I had a 21-hour day. It was crazy. And like, what could it be like? And then you go to set and you're like, I had a solid 10-hour day. I got to see my family. I got sleep.
I was
like,
home for dinner. I was home for pork chops.
I got to exercise after work or before. Like, whoa. Like, that'd be cool if those were the conversations we had around set.
It would be amazing. Actually, I think it would be kind of life-changing for all of us.
Well, on that nice life-changing note, I want to thank you so much for your time, Meg. It's really awesome to see you.
So nice to see like work people talk about work things.
I know.
It's so refreshing. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for your time. I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay.